Hello and a very warm welcome. You're watching Middle East Now on I24 News. Our headlines this hour. Israel carries out a series of airstrikes on Yemen after the Houthis fired a ballistic missile at central Israel. Russia's Vladimir Putin denies he was beaten in Syria with the fall of Assad. And fighting continues in Syria between the Western-backed Kurdish-led SDF and Turkish-backed forces. First, Israel has carried out a series of airstrikes in Yemen after the country's Houthi rebels launched a ballistic missile at Israel in the early hours of this morning. The missile was intercepted, but debris fell and hit a school in the central city of Ramat Gan. Local officials said it caused some $11 million worth of damage. Well, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that by striking back at the Houthis, the last arm of the Iranian resistance, Israel was doing the world a favour.
As of this morning, the Air Force attacked strategic Houthi targets in the port of Hodeidah and deep inside Yemen. We did this in response to the Houthis' repeated attacks on civilian targets in Israel. Last night, they attacked a school in Ramat Gan. They are not just attacking us. They are attacking the entire world. They are attacking international shipping and trade routes. Thus, when Israel acts against the Houthis, it is acting for the entire international community. The Americans understand this well, and so do many others. After Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Assad regime in Syria, the Houthis are almost the last remaining arm of Iran's evil axis. They are learning, and they will learn the hard way, that whoever harms Israel pays a very heavy price for it.
Well, the IDF says that this morning's strike on Yemen was pre-planned following months of attacks. Our Alex Schloss has more.
Just after sirens rang out across central Israel, triggered by a ballistic missile launched from Yemen, the Israeli Air Force conducted a series of strikes on Houthi targets in regions under the rebel group's control.
The IDF conducted precise strikes on Houthi military targets in Yemen, including ports and energy infrastructures in Sana'a, which the Houthis have been using in ways that effectively contributed to their military actions. Israel will not hesitate to act in order to defend itself and its citizens from the Houthis' attacks.
Despite the weakening of Hezbollah in Lebanon and the collapse of the Assad regime in Syria, one Iranian-backed group remains undeterred in continuing its campaign against Israel and shipping transiting the Red Sea.
The missile force of the Yemeni armed forces carried out a significant military operation targeting two vital and sensitive military targets of the Israeli enemy in the occupied Jaffa area using two Palestine hypersonic ballistic missiles. The operation achieved its goals successfully, by the grace of Allah. The operation was carried out simultaneously with the Israeli aggression against civilian facilities in the capital Sana'a and the Hodeidah province, including power stations.
The IDF stated that the two waves of strikes, which followed shortly after the Houthi missile launch, were not a direct retaliation for the latest attack, but part of a pre-planned operation in response to months of attempted Houthi strikes on Israel. Though the latest missile launch was intercepted, large chunks of shrapnel impacted a school, collapsing one of the buildings. No one was injured as a result of the falling shrapnel. The Israeli Air Force deployed 14 fighter jets to target Houthi infrastructure at the ports of Hodeidah, Salif, and Ras Issa oil terminal along the Red Sea, with 9 people reportedly killed in the strikes. Beyond targeting infrastructure, Israel is also vowing to take actions against Houthi leadership.
I warn the leaders of the Houthi terrorist organization, Israel's long hand will reach you too. Whoever raises a hand against the state of Israel, his hand will be cut off. Whoever strikes us will be hit sevenfold. We will not accept missile fire on Israel, nor damage to shipping lanes. We will strike with force and will not allow the continuation of the situation of shooting and threats against the state of Israel.
Houthi attacks are likely to continue despite the Israeli strikes and threats of further actions. just as they have persisted in the face of recent U.S. coalition strikes. However, with their infrastructure repeatedly taking damage and their Iranian patrons weakened, it remains uncertain how long the Houthis will be able to sustain their campaign.
Well, with me in the studio this hour, Lieutenant Colonel Doron Avital is a former commander in the Special Forces of the IDF. Good to have you with us, Doron. Our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osseran, also with us. Hi, Ariel. So, Doron, how much damage did those counterstrikes by Israel cause to Yemen last night?
No, I think they are dramatic. It's a show of force, which is, I'm sure you can, I'm not sure how many air forces can create in such a short period of time, such attack in such volume, in such targets. Also, it's an indication for the level of our intelligence, but also this is a big operation. I think that the Houthis in the end are not matched to our power, and they overplayed their hand. And I hope they will stop those rockets. Of course, we are part of a coalition in this context because
Right, the US carried out airstrikes just a few nights ago.
Exactly, but it's important for Israel if we are being attacked to show that we can counterattack and in such a force in those ports, in those infrastructures.
Ariel, is there a sense that Israel is now turning its focus more fully to the Houthis?
Well, the Houthis are emerging as the last remaining significant proxy Iran has currently active and engaging Israel. Now, I just want to know in terms of the time framing, this as the missile was on its way to Israel, the jets were on their way to Yemen. So,
and they crossed paths,
so to speak. And so this was planned weeks in advance, and the timing just made it coincide. But we're talking about 14 fighter jets that took part in this with refueling. Among the targets was energy infrastructure, and this was the first in Israel strikes, also the first time it targeted Sana'a proper, the capital. But if we take a step back to zoom out on the campaign between Israel and the Houthis, since the start of the war, they've launched more than 200 ballistic missiles, nearly 200 drones. Israel has struck even more forceful than what it did overnight, and these strikes are persisting. And so I think the main achievement here is practice for the Israeli Air Force for more significant strategic targets, not to say Iran, but I am not sure that in the long run these airstrikes, as impressive as they may be militarily, are what's going to stop the Houthis from continuing their strikes, and the Houthis are vowing to continue that as well.
The IDF says it did take out all 3 of the Houthis' ports today, so that's interesting as well. Let me bring in David Schenker. He's the former US Assistant Secretary of State for Near Eastern Affairs and now the Director for the Program on Arab Politics at the Washington Institute for Near East Affairs. Thank you very much indeed for being with us, David. So the Houthis, they do seem determined, don't they, to keep on attacking Israel, trying to strike Israel, despite the repercussions from not just Israel, but also the United States and its allies. Why is that?
Well, the Houthis are a highly ideological group. They are committed. They have basically cut their teeth and based their legitimacy on their quote-unquote defense of Palestinians in Gaza. They now control Bab al-Mandeb, access to the Red Sea, providing Iran with basically control over the 2 key energy choke points in the Middle East, if not in the world, between the Straits of Hormuz and the Bab al-Mandeb. They are succeeding, and I think they have very little regard for the Yemeni people. And so even if there is a cost, this is not a cost that they will bear directly. It's only on the people that they govern or control.
Well, with their patrons in Tehran very much under pressure, and with the demise of the other Iranian proxies in the region, will the Houthis now be able to rearm? Will they be seeking more investment, more support from Iran, or how do you think they will adapt their strategy?
Yeah, I don't think they ever stopped arming. The United States, the international community, has not devoted the resources to embargo arms deliveries to the Houthis. It's a significant task, a large coastline. The Iranians appear committed, and they have fewer and fewer proxies that are effective these days, with Hamas gone, Hezbollah gone, the Fatah in Syria non-existent. It's just the Houthis, and of course, the Houthi in Iraq, which let's not forget, between November and October, fired some 150 rockets and drones into Israel, killing 3 Israeli soldiers in the Golan.
And can we expect a more robust strategy regarding the Houthis when President Trump takes office?
Open question. You know, the Biden administration, I think, has really picked it up in the past 2 months after an embarrassing letter was leaked by CENTCOM Commander Eric Kurilla to Lloyd Austin, saying that the United States was playing purely defense, not targeting leadership, not proactively targeting Houthi assets and individuals. And finally, they have stepped it up. But as we know, President Trump doesn't like wars. He's asked the government of Israel to end all the Middle East wars. And he may very well say this is an issue for the Saudis and the Egyptians, who, by the way, are losing 50% of their Suez Canal revenues over the past year, to step up. This is called burden sharing. It's something President Trump is really into. But I do think he's not going to stand by and play defense on this issue. He'll either leave it up to partners or actually do something. Open question, though.
David Schenker, great to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The group Human Rights Watch has accused Israel of depriving people in Gaza of adequate water, claiming thousands of people have died from thirst. Well, Israel's foreign ministry says that the report is full of lies. Israel says via its Kogat administration arm that 3 water lines from Israel are active, supplying an average of 107 litres per person in the north of Gaza, 34 litres per person in central Gaza, and 20 litres per person in southern Gaza. According to international standards, conflict zones require 15 litres of water per person daily, and this amount exceeds that. Well, to talk more about that, we're joined by Andrew Fox. He's a research fellow at the Henry Jackson Society. Thank you very much for being with us, Andrew. Good to see you again. So, I mean, first it was indiscriminate bombing, then it was starvation. Now, apparently, Israel is depriving Gazans of water. Is there any truth to these latest accusations?
And of course, don't forget a report where they've changed the definition of genocide to make it fit what's happening in Gaza as well, from good old Amnesty. Look, this is very clearly a pre-Trump surge in trying to put international pressure on Israel through a variety of very, very tiresome blood libels. I think it's disgusting. I think Israel should refuse to take this nonsense seriously. Israel knows what it's doing. They know water's going in. They know food is going in. They know there are distribution problems within Gaza because Hamas still control too much of the area and control too much of the supply. But we know Mr. Trump is coming in on 20th of January. We know he has appointed the most pro-Israel cabinet in US history. And we know that the Palestinian cause is going to get very short shrift once the Trump administration is in power. So what we're seeing now is a surge of libels to try and shape the narrative before Mr. Trump reaches the White House.
And of course, just to be clear, I mean, no one is saying that civilians are not suffering in Gaza. There is a war still going on. But these accusations do seem to get more and more spectacular. Do you think that Israel is doing enough to get the truth out and to get on top of these accusations?
I mean, it's been a challenge throughout the conflict. I think Israel's foreign ministry could have done a lot more, a lot sooner. I think they've loaded far too much onto the IDF spokesman's department. And poor old Admiral Hagari's been thrashed trying to get the message out. But the bottom line is the world is misreporting this conflict. We've just released a study through the Henry Jackson Society where one chapter looks at the media coverage. 98% of media outlets in the period studied used Hamas's figures of casualties, and 3% used the IDF's. So they're fighting in an environment that's very tough to get the message out. I have sympathy for them. But I think by dignifying the nonsense that Human Rights Watch today pushed out with a serious response, I think it should just be disregarded and don't give it the dignity and the time of giving it a proper response.
All right. Andrew, thank you very much indeed. Andrew Fox there at the Henry Jackson Society.
Thanks.
Well, meanwhile, indirect talks between Israel and Hamas continue in Qatar. It's the latest attempt to secure a deal to free the 100 hostages who are still being held in Gaza. Let's get the latest with our Balir Sladin. He's down at Hostages Square in Tel Aviv. And Balir, the latest we're hearing is that Hamas wants a 7-day ceasefire before it will even confirm how many of those hostages are still alive.
Yes, that's not the first time that they demand this few days of ceasefire, because they're claiming that they can't locate any of the hostages, and they need some days in order to locate them and then send a list with their names. That's a demand from Hamas that Israel has over and over rejected, saying that any ceasefire should actually be linked to release of hostages, and Israel is very insisting on that specific thing. That's not only the thing that we are facing as an obstacle. Today, the New York Times are saying that there are lots of obstacles, huge obstacles actually, still being discussed in the talks in Qatar, while the CIA director, William Burns, is there alongside Britt McCormick, the Middle East special envoy for the U.S. administration. They are holding talks with the Qatari Prime Minister and hoping for an Israeli delegation and an Egyptian delegation to come and hold talks as well, while we are also getting from the Israeli consul in New York saying that sealing a deal depends only on Hamas, and citing what the Americans has been saying over the past month, that only Hamas is now the obstacle to reaching that deal. By the way, we've talked to some of the families here and asked them about their response to the latest developments and all the positive atmosphere that we're feeling. Everyone is feeling it, but they are saying that we cannot trust anything, because after all, we've been into such phases, and we can't trust that this time is different. Let's just hear what some of the families had to say.
It's very, very difficult. Very difficult. Of course, we want everybody to be here. We want all the hostages to come immediately. But unfortunately, it's not the status in Israel. There is a negotiation here, and we are not alone here. We are also with Hamas, and Hamas is also with other countries that put the pressure on them, but maybe not enough. So I expect everybody to put pressure on Hamas to finish this deal. I want everybody here now as soon as possible, because you see, 440 days captivity.
Yeah, very hard for the families of the hostages. That was the uncle, wasn't it, of Yarden Bibas, who was taken by terrorists along with his wife Shiri and their young children, Ariel and baby Kvir. Thank you, Balir Sladin, there, down in central Tel Aviv. Well, with me in the studio, Ariel Osseran and Doron Avital, formerly of the Special Forces in the IDF. Doron, are you more hopeful this time around? I've asked you this question many, many times over the past 14 months, but we are seeing a few more details that haven't been spoken about before, haven't we? For example, the possibility of Palestinian prisoners being deported to Turkey or Qatar.
No, I'm a bit more optimistic. I think this is the first step in a process that would in the end lead to the end of the war and to some day after in Gaza. I think this first step is necessary. Of course, we would have liked to have seen a full deal with all the hostages delivered, but then this would
rather
mean,
than a staged
exactly. But
release.
I don't see any other option right now. So even for those families that are so worried, and we can understand the anxiety, we have to follow this first step and see how it unfolds. Ceasefire, exchange, see that it worked, that there's somebody to work with, and then see what's the day after. And I think an important thing about the day after that comes lately to the foreground is the presence or the position of the Palestinian Authority. We saw lately that even in the cabinet, they instruct the IDF maybe to even arm the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank against terror attacks because of... So maybe there's a...
Because they're also battling
exactly.
Hamas and Palestinians.
So we are starting to see a beginning of a process, because until now Israel didn't want to hear of no other Palestinian... no Palestinian in this process, but there's no other option. So I think first step, this hostage deal, then a longer one, then a day after.
But there's also a suggestion that, because we heard from Israel Katz, the defense minister, yesterday, I think it was, or the day before, and he says Israel will maintain security control of Gaza, hostage deal or not. So, I mean, does that mean...
It's very clear, the logic is very clear. Even if you treat the Gaza Strip under the geometry of the A, B, C of the Oslo Accords of the West Bank, it means that you're dealing with the Palestinian Authority. There's no way to avoid it. When we say that we can intercept, enter Gaza, or operate militarily the same we do in the West Bank, it has to be under some framework. And I would think that the framework would include the Palestinian Authority, and I think that's what the Egyptians say to us. This is what our allies say to us.
Mahmoud Abbas is in Cairo right now, of course. So you foresee Israel having overarching security control, but inside the Palestinian Authority will be responsible for schooling.
This is the only logic right now is possible, and if you want to introduce resources, financial resources to recover Gaza, this means the Arab countries, it means that they would demand this as a demand. This is a whole big context, but right now we have to put our eyes on the first step, the humanitarian step of the hostage deal. It's important. We have to do it, and we have to do it fast.
All right. And Ariel, Hamas is still managing to fire rockets, albeit very infrequently, but they are managing to still attack Israel. I mean, are they a spent force in Gaza?
Look, Israel cannot, or if it chooses to go after every single militant and every single rocket, that will take years, because that would mean they would have to go inch by inch across the Gaza Strip and clear it out. That hasn't been the declared goal, and most experts would say that that shouldn't be the declared goal, that you can degrade their military capabilities. Israel has done that, has revoked their military apparatus, turning them into a guerrilla, into guerrilla warfare. Now, in order to complete the success, you need to provide a diplomatic pathway, a framework for them to move forward. And I think you can actually, there was a very interesting security briefing this evening regarding Israel's relationship with the PA in the West Bank. And that despite statements, declarations by many members of the current sitting government that have vowed, or that say that it is in Israel's interest to degrade the capabilities of the Palestinian Authority, in fact, the political echelon has sanctioned the military to bolster the capabilities of the PA to help them. And what we're seeing now...
There's a double game going on when it comes to the PA.
In the Middle East, it's always the game. There's the rhetoric, the political rhetorics, and there's the communication of the security forces. And you have to
in Israel, it's been perfected to an art.
Oh, well, similar with Jordan, to be fair.
Of course, Jordan, Egypt,
we'll hear
everywhere.
the King of Jordan talk about Israel in one way, and then there is extensive security cooperation under the
Of course, in the context of what happens in Syria, the Jordanian king really needs our help in our security help. So, of course, the rhetoric can be here, but underneath there has to be very strong ties in order to hold the structure strong.
And on the West Bank, I mean, as you mentioned, Ariel, there has been a major uptick in violence there. PA security forces fighting terrorist groups, Hamas, but also Palestinian Islamic Jihad, some of which, of course, Ariel, are armed and funded and trained by Iran. We saw the IDF carry out an airstrike in the West Bank city of Tulkarem earlier today. That used to be highly unusual, and it has become increasingly commonplace, hasn't it?
Yeah, this has become common practice since October 7th of last year, with the amplification of Israel's activity in the West Bank. Talking about an afternoon drone strike on a car in the Tulkarem camp in the northern West Bank, killing 4 people, injuring 3 in critical condition. That's according to the Palestinian Health Ministry. One of those killed was the head of the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade in the camp. And we really see this as just one part of Israel's daily, ongoing, and consistent activity against terror nests all over the West Bank, except for one place, and that's Jenin, because the Palestinian security forces have been operating there for 15 days straight, besieging the camp, which is considered to be the main terror hub in the West Bank.
And they've reasserted control there, have they?
They're working on it. They haven't. The job hasn't been completed yet. They are not receiving the full support from the street within Jenin. There's a strike going on there. They're definitely in an uphill battle. But this, again, these latest indications from the military that Israel intends to assist and help the Palestinian Authority further reassert their sovereignty, beginning in Jenin, but I would imagine they want to see this spread elsewhere. This is a positive indication, but the main conflict between the Palestinian Authority and terror nests in Jenin is still ongoing, and it's something that should be followed.
And of course, the Americans requested that Israel would allow it to start arming the PA. I mean,
sure. I mean,
that's a good idea, isn't it?
The U.S. has its vision. We'll see what the Trump's administration vision will be. Of course, it wouldn't be to annex the territories, and it wouldn't be to dismantle the Oslo Accord or whatever. I mean,
so deal of the century could be the deal of the millennia now.
Exactly,
that could be better.
So we have to see what.
Well, in
what
all
he
seriousness,
brings.
do you think Trump will come back with another plan?
I think the only play in the playbook is this corridor, is the normalization with Saudi Arabia. We heard about the Saudis saying about some kind of phrasing about some path to the establishing
a viable path to Palestinian statehood.
A path or a pathway, or it's
but it's important, and maybe there's some phrasing that can create this the normalization. The normalization would mean also resources to Gaza. It would mean to establish, but the only problem would be, of course, our government, because those extreme right-wing like Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, of course, would object to such a move. So it will be an interesting.
Right, but by bringing Gideon Saar into the government, who's
exactly,
now the
so
foreign
it
minister,
helps
he's changed the calculations somewhat, hasn't
but still, this would be an issue, and then we might see, I don't know, also political turmoil or elections in Israel. Nobody can tell.
Look, if we talk about the discrepancy between actions and statements, just 2 days ago, Prime Minister Netanyahu issued a statement saying that Israel will not accept Palestinian statehood and is working to thwart that possibility.
Exactly.
So,
well, I mean, that's in line with the opinion polls in Israel, right? If you ask most Israelis today if they want a Palestinian state.
There's some necessity to history. There's no pathway to the issue here without the normalization with Saudi Arabia, without this corridor, without investing some resources in Gaza, without establishing a Palestinian Authority, whether you call it in the end an autonomy or a Palestinian state. Anyway, it's a state without an army. We'll have to work out some resolution. I'm not sure when it can be far in the future.
But it would mean Israel relinquishing security control, in your view?
But then you can have you have the circumstances under which you can operate with. We have it in the ceasefire in Lebanon, and so we are the strongest guy in the game, in which we should be generous and smart.
Okay, all right. We're going to take a short break. Thank you both. When we come back, we're going to talk about Syria. Many changes there, of course, following the rapid fall of the Assad regime just over a week ago. Stay with us.
It started on October 7th, but for many, the horror may never end. With homes destroyed, families displaced, hostages missing, soldiers fallen, and a country traumatized. In the first year alone, more than 17,000 Israelis have been wounded, and hundreds of thousands have experienced psychological trauma and need support now. Thankfully, for 112 years, Hadassah hospitals have been on the ground healing. At our expanding Gandel Rehabilitation Center, we're providing critical physical therapy and life-changing mental health services.
Hadassah is a great place.
Today I'm really thankful.
Now, some are back home, living their lives, but many more still need our help. Help your family and friends heal at Hadassah hospitals. Give today.
You live in Israel or you are preparing for your Aliyah? Congratulations. You have a smartphone? Perfect. Download the Olim app for free and discover everything we have to offer. Booking medical and administrative appointments, bills paying, debt verification, instant translation, contractor recommendation, request tracking, and much more. And if you can't manage it on your own, our team speaks your language and assists you with all your procedures in Israel, starting from 199 shekels per month, unlimited and for the whole family. Don't hesitate any longer. Download the app or contact us.
Welcome back. Russia's President Vladimir Putin denies that Russia was defeated in Syria. He says Moscow is now seeking to negotiate the status of its military bases with the new rulers in Damascus. Speaking at a press conference in Moscow earlier, where the ousted Syrian leader Bashar al-Assad has been granted asylum, Putin insisted Russia had achieved its goals in the Middle East. It was his first public statement on Syria since the fall of the regime he supported for almost a decade.
You, while those who pay your salaries would like to present everything that is happening in Syria is some kind of failure, a defeat for Russia. I assure you it's not true, and I'll tell you why. We came to Syria 10 years ago so that a terrorist enclave would not be created there like what we have seen in some other countries, like Afghanistan. Overall, we have achieved our goals. And even those groups that once fought with the Assad regime, with the government forces, they too have undergone internal changes. It is not without reason that today many European countries and the US want to establish relations with them. If they are a terrorist organization, why are you coming there? Of course, we look forward to a peace in the Syrian Arab Republic. We maintain relations with all groups that control the situation there, with all the countries in the region. The overwhelming majority of them tell us that they would be interested in us keeping our military bases in Syria. I don't know. We have to think about it, because we have to decide for ourselves how our relationship will develop with the political forces that are now in control.
Doron Avital and Ariel Osseran still with me in the studio. So, Ariel, a real change in tone from the Russian leader who has been calling the Syrian rebels terrorists for years. Now he's saying that they are people who should be considered as partners for negotiation.
Look, don't want to burst his bubble, but it's not up to Putin if he is able to maintain Russian forces in Syria. That is up to the interim government and their prospective allies. Not sure what role Russia will have in that. Not only that, he said that that Russia didn't have any ground forces in Syria, and so they couldn't really help Assad push back the advancing rebels, saying blaming the Iranians and Hezbollah for quickly fleeing the scene. I think someone should remind Putin that when he wanted to salvage Assad's government, when back in 2014, 15, 16, Assad was left with only 25% of the country's territory, and in a massive bombardment campaign from the air, alongside Iranian and Hezbollah forces, managed to help him regain the vast majority of that territory. He saw that the calculations are different, that the reality on the ground is not in his favor, and so he cut his losses. Now his forces have consolidated to two of the only two remaining air bases, Khmeimim and Tartus. Their longevity on Syrian territory is up in the air as of now.
Yeah, and he says he's renegotiating. And it's interesting because Assad said in a statement earlier this week he only left Syria because the Russians made him. So it's interesting to hear the opposite from Putin.
Well, I think the way the Russians operated in the first few years of the civil war in Syria was like they syndicated the forces that supported Assad, and they had Hezbollah was the greatest pillar that held the whole system. Once we took Nasrallah, was in the status of head of state, and Hezbollah was dismantled. There was nothing to hold it, and I think he cut his losses in the end. And in this respect, this is why his tone is so, because he really cut his losses. He couldn't invest more. He would have to invest resources like in Ukraine in order to get it back. He couldn't. Okay, this is for sure. So this is as far as Russia. As far as Turkey, it's interesting, because we all, I mean, my grandfather from the old city of Jerusalem was living under the Ottoman Empire. So it's interesting to see the Ottoman Empire coming back to our borders.
Big time.
In the north, we'll have to take it into account. Turkey is also part of NATO, so it's a very complicated new structure. And we have to see this new leader in Syria. How does he play his moves?
Exactly. Well, on that note, Syria's new leader, Ahmed al-Sharaa, has been giving more interviews to Western news outlets. Today he told the BBC that Syria was exhausted by war and now presented no threat to its neighbours nor to the West. But some, including here in Israel, have warned that al-Sharaa, a former jihadist for al-Qaeda and others, may not be completely reformed. Well, for more on that, we're joined by Hussein Abdul Hussein. He's a research fellow at the Foundation for the Defence of Democracies, the FDD. Good to see you, Hussein. So al-Sharaa is making all the right noises, isn't he, on minorities, on education for women, even on Israel. Can we take him at his word?
Well, I personally tried to, and over the past week, I've seen signs, all the signs moving in the opposite direction. Number one, the interview you're referencing, the one that he gave to the BBC, he said women will get education, but when he was asked about alcohol, he said that will be decided by a committee of experts. I'm assuming his own Islamist experts. So I'm not really hopeful about liberty coming around soon. Now, how does this affect Israel? We know that he said he'll stick to the 1974 agreement. I think truce is what Islamist organizations love the most. Over the past 20 years, we've seen Hamas propose some sort of truce or another with Israel. So none of what he's saying tells me that he's parting or leaving behind the script of Islamist, of trying to build your power base, maintain a truce with Israel, and when you get a chance, go after the Jewish state.
Right, and it would be suicidal for al-Sharaa to declare war on Israel right now. Israel very much not in the mood for any additional conflict. Do you think Israel's right then to hold on to the strategic peak of the Hermon mountain until the situation in Syria becomes clearer, even though it is getting a lot of international pressure for doing that?
Well, I think Israel is right because its posture is assuming that the worst will happen in Syria. Now, the rest of the world does not share a border with Syria, so, they might say whatever they want. But in the case of Israel, they had to take out the arsenal of al-Assad so that it wouldn't fall in the hands of either Hezbollah or HTS and al-Sharaa. And, of course, the Israeli military will have to stand in a position ready for war, maybe not right now, maybe in the coming 3 years, 5 years, or 10 years. The last thing that Israel would want to happen is for HTS to start digging tunnels, preparing an infrastructure. From now until a few years, we will see HTS ready to go to war. So this is something Israel is trying to prevent, and rightly so.
And meanwhile, every day we're learning new horrors that were committed by the Assad regime, and the mass graves, the torture prisons, all the rest of it. I mean, moving forward, do you think there will have to be some kind of truth and reconciliation process in Syria? And do you think al-Sharaa and his allies will be the people to lead that?
Well, this is, if they go to court and if they try to take Assad to court, then Sharaa has American blood on his hand, Iraqi blood on his hand, and Syrian blood on his hand. So unless they hit the reset button, I don't see this, getting to a settlement for everyone. So they have to hit the reset. Now, the question is who hits this reset? Because we have seen Sharaa calling on everyone to surrender their arms, all the militias to surrender their arms. But surrender to who? There's no state, so they'll be surrendering their arms to him. And he himself is a militia. So the game is really one of pick your poison. So it depends which party you see as the worst party, which one you see as bad. And then you pick one of those and you hope that nothing worse happens.
The former Syrian opposition, of course, is strongly supported by Turkey. Is there a risk, Hussein, that Syria has traded Russia and Iran's patronage for Turkey's?
Well, I think Turkey it will be the patron, and not Turkey alone. I think Qatar and Doha will be on board. They are closer to Sharaa. Turkey has another bunch of opposition, but they are on board together. Now, what was really interesting to me watching Syria is that the old outfit, the globally recognized Syrian opposition, was not allowed to get back to Damascus as a council. So this coalition was prevented by Sharaa himself. So even the opposition that was mixed and that had, everyone was represented, even that is not accepted in the new Syria. So I'm thinking we will see Qatar as holding the biggest influence, and right after that, Turkey. And of course, Turkey's interest is to go after the Kurds in the east, the northeast. So I don't see any other countries really having leverage. If there is civil war, if HTS fails to hold the ground in Syria, then expect Iran to come back, because the Iran regime thrives in civil wars, and it will do its best to rearm Hezbollah and get back into Syria. If there's no civil war, it means HTS will take over Syria and will turn Syria into an Islamist state. So these are the two options. Unfortunately, both are not the best options.
Pretty bleak outlook. Hussein, thank you very much. Hussein Abdul Hussein there at the FTT.
Thank you.
And Ariel, we have evidence that not everyone in Syria is happy about the rise of Ahmed al-Sharaa, despite the very moderate statements that he is making.
Or at least this new reality. We're talking about a massive fire that erupted yesterday in Aleppo's International Stadium in the Al-Hamdaniya neighborhood. This is the largest stadium in Syria. And according to the White Helmets, that's the civil defense in Syria, this was started deliberately and intentionally. In other words, arson. Now, what are they basing this on? Ghaid al-Saleh, the head of the White Helmet, saying that just as the fire was starting to gain steam in this stadium, they received 2 calls in separate neighborhoods in opposite side of Aleppo, sending the teams there to divert their attention. Now, why are we even talking about this? Because tomorrow was supposed to be the first friendly match to take place in this stadium, a symbolic event, so to speak, to kind of usher in the new era following the fall of the Assad regime. And it appears that those who set fire to the stadium did not want to see this game take place, and it signifies the challenges that still remain inside Syria as the Syrian people try and shape their new future by themselves. There are other instances of violence and sporadic here and there, but this is really, I think, a good example to show that there are still many challenges that remain in Syria's long road to rehabilitation.
All right, Ariel, and just real quick then.
There's no vacuum in the Middle East, there's no vacuum in nature. The war in Iraq, then the Iranian extending their reach into Syria and Lebanon.
Once Saddam was out the way,
course,
Iran
exactly,
grew in power.
ISIS, Al-Qaeda. And then now we have Syria. We have, the way it was presented, there are no too good, the two options are not good, but who knows, maybe it will be a new Syria. Let's hope. Our hopes are there.
We should just note that massive protests across Syria by seculars, women, men, all faced together. They're calling for a third option that wasn't proposed, and that can't be knocked off the table either.
If it will play Islamic, it will be a catastrophe for Syria. But if it is going to be a guy that integrates all those different cuts of the Syrian society, maybe
there are many minorities
of a new leader. Who knows?
All right, Doran Avital, Ariel Lassaran, thank you both.
Thanks.
Well, there is still fighting in Syria. Fighting's raging on in the northeast of the country, where the Kurdish-led US-backed Syrian Democratic Forces, or the SDF, are under attack from Turkish-led forces. Turkey is already occupying a vast swathe of northern Syria as part of what it says are counter-terrorism efforts against the PKK and its affiliates. The SDF, you'll remember, defeated ISIS when they took over areas of Syria and Iraq several years ago. We're here to talk about that. Mutlu Civaroglu is a Kurdish affairs analyst and a journalist at Voice of America. Thank you very much indeed for being with us, Mutlu. Good to have you on the programme. So first of all, in terms of the situation on the ground, the SDF says it is right now under pressure in places like Kobane and Raqqa. These are cities that people in Europe will know because this is where a few years ago the SDF defeated ISIS. What is happening there now?
Yes, Laura, you're right. Especially the Kobane, the symbolic city that ISIS caliphate was first defeated, has been under siege. There are concerns that military operations can be launched by Turkey and the groups under Turkey's control. And similarly, Raqqa as well. Raqqa and the Raqqa countryside, there were some attacks in the Tel Aviv area. So these two centers are important. Raqqa was the capital of the so-called caliphate, and Kobane was where it's defeated. and the Turkish government's statements that we are going to do a military operation is there. Today in Tishrin Dam, one of the major water resources, and the Kara Kocak bridge that connects Manbij to Kobani, there were clashes reported by SDF from the Syrian National Army groups. And as like I said, in the west of Kobani as well, there are some artillery shelling. So despite the truce that has been announced the other day, there are kind of violations reported. Situation, although calm, but people I talk to, military, political or regular people, they're worried that there can be some moves towards them.
Well, the US has backed the SDF for some years now, and we have heard in recent days some influential senators like Lindsey Graham, Republican, for example, speak up for the Kurds and for the SDF. But when it comes down to it, are they actually getting any assistance from the Americans?
Laura, I think the support for the Kurds in the US, in Washington, elsewhere, is very strong. Not only Senator Graham of Republican Party and Van Hollen of Democrat. Remember, both parties, different parties. And today I shared the video of Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana, and another Republican. His statement was the strongest by far so far. He criticized Mr. Erdogan very sharply that his hatred makes this hostility towards Kurds, and that he should leave the Kurds alone. I don't know, probably your viewers seen that video. I mean, the support is there. Just today in the budget that I approved, there is $140 million for SDF in the new budget. So politically, militarily, a public sense, there's a very strong Kurd support for the Kurdish people, because American public consider Kurds as their allies, as their friends. And the Pentagon sees Kurds as a very reliable partner. Over and over has proven itself its reliability, dependability, trustworthiness. That's the organization defeated ISIS. And ISIS is trying to use the post-Assad situation in its favor to make a comeback. In desert area, in the recent months, there has already been increased attacks. So the prisoners that are kept, thousands of prisoners,
And I know I want to talk about the prisoners, because I know that, of course, the SDF and its fighters are guarding those prisoners, which are holding thousands of ISIS fighters inside, and they say that they are coming under pressure and they might not be able to do that. But look, Turkey is also, an ally of the United States. Turkey is a member of NATO. They're saying that now that Assad is gone, there's no need for the SDF, and the SDF should disband, it should disarm, and should just take part in building a new Syria. What do you say to that?
Laura, these are very premature statements. Nobody knows what's going to happen in Syria. Remember what's happening to Alawite minority. They are raising alarm that they are being targeted. Christians are under big fear. Kurds sacrificing over 10,000 of men and women. They're under threat. Their system, political system that they built over the years, civil war, power shared with Arabs, Christians, other ethnic and religious minorities, gender-based society, they're all under threat. Nobody knows what's going to happen in Syria. So it's not realistic to expect Syrian Democratic Forces to disband its forces. They announced that in a future Syria, when there is a Syria that's represented by all its ethnic and religious fabric, they announced that they'll be gladly part of the Syrian army. But it's too soon now, too premature now, because nobody knows what's going on. Assad is gone. Everybody is happy. Kurds were happy. They toppled this Assad statue in their cities. But right after that, now they are facing this incursion, this military operation. So it's not realistic. Here in Washington, in our coverage, I don't come across anyone expecting SDF to disband. SDF has a critical mission of defeating ISIS, not allowing ISIS to make a comeback. A coalition is there, U.S. military is there. And nobody knows how HTS is going to perform. Right. They are giving soft messages, but it's not enough. But for your viewers, the situation is critical. But the friends of Kurds in the U.S. they're talking. Right. I think they're giving strong reaction.
Matlu, we have to leave it there, but thank you very much. We appreciate it. Matlu Chivarolu there from Voice of America. Thank you. Well, the fall of the Assad regime is having far-reaching consequences, including as far away as Libya. Russia is moving some military hardware out of its former ally, and some of that is making its way to the North African country. Well, for more on that, we're joined by Zineb Rubor. She's a research fellow at the Hudson Institute. Great to see you again, Zineb. So why Libya? Why is Russia moving this military hardware there?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. I would say that Libya is strategically important to Russia for two main reasons. It's about energy and geopolitical and military influence. Libya holds Africa's largest proven oil reserves, estimated at 48.4 billion barrels. It is a key energy asset for Russian interests in leveraging influence over Europe's energy supply. Its location in the Mediterranean and proximity to Sahel countries where the Russian paramilitary group Wagner operate is very important for Moscow, especially in terms of its ability to project military power and counter NATO's influence. More importantly, supporting factions like Khalifa Haftar's faction aligns with the Kremlin strategy to back, really strong leaders where the Kremlin can maneuver and shape the political landscape in Libya. And finally, I would say that Russian companies like Gazprom seek economic opportunities across Africa. And for these reasons, Libya is very important to Russia.
Well, quite. What about from the Libyan perspective, though? Because this country has been trying but failing since the ousting of Muammar Gaddafi over a decade ago to move forward and build some kind of democratic state. I mean, what does a boosted Russian presence mean for Libya?
Well, I think that there is another key player here, just like in Syria. Turkey is playing an enormous role in Libya. They have military agreements with the UN-backed government of National Accord (GNA). They have they send advanced drone capabilities. They've deployed Turkish forces as well as allied fighters. They also ensured strategic dominance in the West, including Tripoli. President Erdogan continued diplomatic engagement, etc. So I think here that if Russia tries, to have something similar that it had in Syria, it will find Turkey again. And this is where I see it as a more that there's a geostrategic game that is going to play, and I doubt that the Russians will try to get involved in that, given that they just lost a key strategic posture they had in Syria.
All right, fascinating. Zineb, thank you very much indeed. We appreciate it. Zineb Rubor there. And finally, the price tag is over $5 million. The auction house Sotheby's has just managed to sell the oldest stone version of the 10 Commandments ever found. Our Fabio Shapiro has the story.
Thank you so much.
What is the value of your historical and religious heritage?
At $4,200,000, the 10 Commandments, Richard, it's yours. Sold for $4 million too.
Auction house Sotheby's in New York just sold the oldest known tablet inscribed with the 10 Commandments for over $5 million after fees.
Before you is a stone dating back over 1,500 years. It dates to the late Roman Byzantine period. It is inscribed in Paleo-Hebrew script in 20 lines, the verses of the 10 Commandments.
Centuries later, the tablet was discovered during a railroad construction work near the now Israeli town of Yavne in 1913.
The person who dug it up didn't realize its significance and brought it home and used it as a paving stone. It stayed in this person's home for about 30 years until an archaeologist living in Israel, Dr. Jacob Kaplan, recognized its importance and purchased it from this individual.
The tablet was then sold to Jewish dealers and collectors until it found its way to the auction. And while this may be the oldest version of the Ten Commandments carved in stone ever found, it is not exactly the one that Jews follow today. Instead of the commandment, "Thou shalt not take the Lord's name in vain," it includes an instruction to pray to Mount Gerizim, the holy site of the Samaritans, a group that broke off from the ancient Israelites thousands of years ago. And though the original tablet carried by Moses was never found, it shares a similarity with the auction one.
This stone weighs 115 pounds. It measures about 20 by 22 inches. And in fact, this is exactly the same measurements that the rabbis in the early first centuries agreed was the measurements of the original Ten Commandments that Moses carried down from the Mount.
The oldest piece of the shared moral code to Judaism and other Abrahamic religions was bought by an anonymous buyer who plans to donate it to an Israeli institution.
Incredible story. Well, that brings us to the end of this edition of Middle East Now. Many thanks for watching, and do stay with us here on I24 News. The rundown is next.
It started on October 7th, but for many, the horror may never end. With homes destroyed, families displaced, hostages missing, soldiers fallen, and a country traumatized. In the first year alone, more than 17,000 Israelis have been wounded, and hundreds of thousands have experienced psychological trauma and need support now. Thankfully, for 112 years, Hadassah hospitals have been on the ground healing. At our expanding Gandel Rehabilitation Center, we're providing critical physical therapy and life-changing mental health services.
Hadassah is a great place.
Today I'm really thankful.
Now, some are back home, living their lives, but many more still need our help. Help your family and friends heal at Hadassah hospitals. Give today.
Made for me.
Want to stay on top of the news no matter where you are?
Introducing I24 News' brand new news website.
On our website, you'll find all the latest articles, interviews, and live broadcasts. Everything you need to know right at your fingertips, whenever you want it.
So what are you waiting for? Download the I24 News app today.
The rundown on I-24 News. I'm Nicole Zedek. Thanks for joining us this evening. Israel is striking back against the Houthis in Yemen following months of ballistic missile and drone attacks from the Iranian proxy. The Israeli Air Force carried out a series of pre-planned attacks on Houthi military targets overnight. As jets were in the skies, the Houthis sent a ballistic missile towards central Israel. It was intercepted, but falling debris collapsed part of a school in the greater Tel Aviv area. Also this afternoon, a drone reportedly fired from Yemen was shot down over the Mediterranean Sea. An interceptor missile piercing through the skies of Israel and heading out to sea. Our Alex Schloss has the details.
Just after sirens rang out across central Israel, triggered by a ballistic missile launched from Yemen, the Israeli Air Force conducted a series of strikes on Houthi targets in regions under the rebel group's control.
The IDF conducted precise strikes on Houthi military targets in Yemen, including ports and energy infrastructures in Sana'a, which the Houthis have been using in ways that effectively contributed to their military actions. Israel will not hesitate to act in order to defend itself and its citizens from the Houthis' attacks.
Despite the weakening of Hezbollah in Lebanon and the collapse of the Assad regime in Syria, one Iranian-backed group remains undeterred in continuing its campaign against Israel and shipping transiting the Red Sea.
The missile force of the Yemeni armed forces carried out a significant military operation targeting two vital and sensitive military targets of the Israeli enemy in the occupied Jaffa area using two Palestine hypersonic ballistic missiles. The operation achieved its goals successfully, by the grace of Allah. The operation was carried out simultaneously with the Israeli aggression against civilian facilities in the capital Sana'a and the Hodeidah province, including power stations.
The IDF stated that the two waves of strikes, which followed shortly after the Houthi missile launch, were not a direct retaliation for the latest attack, but part of a pre-planned operation in response to months of attempted Houthi strikes on Israel. Though the latest missile launch was intercepted, large chunks of shrapnel impacted a school, collapsing one of the buildings. No one was injured as a result of the falling shrapnel. The Israeli Air Force deployed 14 fighter jets to target Houthi infrastructure at the ports of Hodeidah, Salif, and Ras Issa oil terminal along the Red Sea, with 9 people reportedly killed in the strikes. Beyond targeting infrastructure, Israel is also vowing to take actions against Houthi leadership.
I warn the leaders of the Houthi terrorist organization, Israel's long hand will reach you too. Whoever raises a hand against the state of Israel, his hand will be cut off. Whoever strikes us will be hit sevenfold. We will not accept missile fire on Israel, nor damage to shipping lanes. We will strike with force and will not allow the continuation of the situation of shooting and threats against the state of Israel.
Houthi attacks are likely to continue despite the Israeli strikes and threats of further actions, just as they have persisted in the face of recent U.S. coalition strikes. However, with their infrastructure repeatedly taking damage and their Iranian patrons weakened, it remains uncertain how long the Houthis will be able to sustain their campaign.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said these attacks against the Houthis are not only protecting Israel, but the entire world.
As of this morning, the Air Force attacked strategic Houthi targets in the port of Hodeidah and deep inside Yemen. We did this in response to the Houthis' repeated attacks on civilian targets in Israel. Last night, they attacked a school in Ramat Gan. They are not just attacking us. They are attacking the entire world. They are attacking international shipping and trade routes. Thus, when Israel acts against the Houthis, it is acting for the entire international community. The Americans understand this well, and so do many others. After Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Assad regime in Syria, the Houthis are almost the last remaining arm of Iran's evil axis. They are learning, and they will learn the hard way, that whoever harms Israel pays a very heavy price for it.
The U.S.-based Human Rights Watch organization is accusing Israel of committing acts of genocide in the Gaza Strip by deliberately depriving Gazans of water. The report claims Israeli authorities are damaging water infrastructure and cutting off supplies to Palestinian civilians. But the Israeli Coordination of Government Activities in the Territories, COGAT, is calling it a libelous claim and egregious lie. COGAT says there are 3 water lines from Israel supplying more than 100 liters per person to northern Gaza, 34 liters per person to central Gaza, and 20 liters per person to the south. According to international standards, conflict zones only require 15 liters of water per person daily, which the Israeli supply clearly exceeds. Meanwhile, Hamas claims it launched an attack drone this afternoon toward the Magen military base near the Gaza Strip. Sirens sounded in 2 border communities before the drone was intercepted by the Air Force, according to the IDF. This says efforts to reach a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip are still underway. We'll bring you a live report from Tel Aviv later in the broadcast. And the IDF says it's working to strengthen the Palestinian Authority so it can combat West Bank terrorism. This comes as the PA has been carrying out operations against terror cells in Jenin. Also today, the Palestinian Authority Health Ministry says 4 people were killed in an Israeli drone strike in the city of Tulkarem, which reportedly targeted a vehicle with 3 people inside. The IDF confirms carrying out an airstrike, but didn't provide any more details. Palestinian officials also claim 2 people were killed by gunshot wounds, including an 80-year-old woman during an Israeli raid in the city of Nablus. The Israeli army is reportedly looking into the deaths. Israeli President Isaac Herzog received a pardon request from the IDF reservist charged with transferring classified information in a scandal that's caused quite the commotion in Prime Minister Netanyahu's office in recent weeks. In a statement from Herzog's office, the president, quote, has full confidence in the legal system and the request will be examined and reviewed like all requests submitted to the president's residence. The unidentified officer could face 7 years in prison for his actions. Meanwhile, a resident of Nazareth has been arrested and charged with spying for Hezbollah during the war. 19-year-old Mohammed Saadi sent information about rocket impacts, aircraft movements, and IDF troops' locations to Hezbollah and the Hezbollah-affiliated Al-Manar news station. According to the Shin Bet security agency and police, he sent pictures and videos to the terror group with this information throughout the course of the war. And with the fall of Assad's regime in Syria, Russian President Vladimir Putin says Russia hasn't been defeated in Syria. And despite Assad seeking refuge in the Russian capital, Moscow has made proposals to the new rulers in Damascus regarding Russia's military bases in the area. Putin also condemned Israel's military moves inside Syria. Here's what the Russian president had to say at a recent press conference.
You, while those who pay your salaries would like to present everything that is happening in Syria is some kind of failure, a defeat for Russia. I assure you it's not true, and I'll tell you why. We came to Syria 10 years ago so that a terrorist enclave would not be created there like what we have seen in some other countries, like Afghanistan. Overall, we have achieved our goals. And even those groups that once fought with the Assad regime, with the government forces, they too have undergone internal changes. It is not without reason that today many European countries and the US want to establish relations with them. If they are a terrorist organization, why are you coming there? Of course, we look forward to a peace in the Syrian Arab Republic. We maintain relations with all groups that control the situation there, with all the countries in the region. The overwhelming majority of them tell us that they would be interested in us keeping our military bases in Syria. I don't know. We have to think about it, because we have to decide for ourselves how our relationship will develop with the political forces that are now in control.
Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian is in Egypt, marking the first visit of its kind between the two countries since 2013. Pezeshkian is in Cairo for a D8 summit of 8 Muslim-majority countries against the backdrop of the war in Gaza and unrest in Syria. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is also at the summit, and it will be the first time Erdogan and Pezeshkian are meeting since the ousting of Syria's President Bashar al-Assad. There will also be a special session on Gaza and Lebanon with Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas in attendance. Now, let's take a deeper look at some of those top stories. For more, I am joined in studio this evening on The Rundown with Brigadier General in Reserves Relek Shafir, former combat pilot and commander at the Tel Nof Air Force Base, as well as our I-24 News Middle East correspondent Ariel Osaran. Gentlemen, thanks for being with us on The Rundown this evening.
Good evening, Nicole.
Relek, I want to begin with this main Air Force operation that we saw out of Yemen just overnight. We're getting more and more details about it, but this is a pretty massive pre-planned attack from the Israeli Air Force. We're talking about an attack that happened 1,300 miles away from Israel. And so from your perspective, a former combat pilot yourself, what does it take to carry out an attack of this kind?
It takes tens of years, dozens of years of experience and training and retraining in all the massive needs of such a far-reaching target that is understand the dangers in that area, the intelligence. What about the targets themselves that have to be attacked on a pinpoint accuracy? What are the threats on the way, the problems on the way of having to refuel in the air? We're talking about a night sortie in this particular case. How do you manage the airplanes, information, and the targeting of the targets themselves? After you hit the target, you move to the next target in your next run. And then if it wasn't damaged badly enough, you have to repeat that and manage that within the 14 planes that took part in that mission. So this is something that the Air Force has been training for years. Wow. And so the pilots are well versed. Many of them are reserve pilots who've been in that business for many, many years. And so this was done, at least it looked like, meticulously.
And that seems to be the results of this as well. Ariel, what do we know not only about the results of this attack, but also the timeline? Because it was clearly a pre-planned attack, but the timing of it, as jets were in the sky, there was a ballistic missile fired from Yemen as well.
Makes you wonder if they got a glimpse of that missile. But if we're talking about the timeline, there were two waves to this strike. The first wave began at 3 a.m., targeting 3 ports on the Red Sea in western Yemen, the Hodeidah port, Salif, as well as a small port called Ras Isa, which is has an important oil refinery over there. Hour and a half later, second wave at 4:30, 2 targets in the Sana area. These were power stations, and this is the first time that both Israel struck in Sana, but also that it targeted power infrastructure. And when we look at the strike today, the drone that made it that was intercepted off the coast of the Mediterranean, pro-Houthi pundits are saying that that targeted a Tel Aviv power station as part of an equation retaliation. But let's take a zoom out and try and place this on a spectrum of months of attacks. We're talking about more than 200 ballistic missiles launched by the Houthis in Yemen at Israel, just under 200 drones in that same time period. Israel has struck multiple times in the Hodeidah port. and other Houthi sites. But in the grand scheme, it doesn't seem that these strikes, perhaps they do give a tactical advantage or tactical damage in the short term. Long term, this doesn't appear to be deterring the Houthis, who are driven, who are adamant to continue in their proxy warfare under the patronage of Iran in favor of the Palestinians. And if we look at their statements, they say that these strikes will continue to take place. We also should remember that the United States and the UK have been carrying out attacks against the Houthis more in recent weeks than Israel had over the past 24 hours. But indeed, this doesn't appear to be what is stopping the Houthis. I think the most significant advantage of this strike is gaining more experience for the fighters for long-distance missions, and Yemen isn't the only destination that interests the Israeli Air Force in those distances. I can think of another major country that we already mentioned that could be a potential target down the line.
Well, I want to get your perspective on that with the swirling reports, even over the course of this week, that Israel had been kind of laying the groundwork via all of the strikes in Syria to then go after the head of the octopus itself, that being Iran. From an Air Force perspective, what type of a mission would that look like, and the complicated risks that the Israeli Air Force would be taking?
Well, we remember that around April, the Israeli Air Force struck Iran in some of its important targets, like the S-300 radar and command control center, and the Fortune. This is an area where the nuclear missiles or missile testing takes place. And these attacks weakened the Iranian ability to defend themselves substantially. But going back and looking at a wider field of view, everybody's vying for position come January 20th. And the grand plan seems to be that on the agenda, there'll be China and the Ukraine. And through that, pressing Iran, because China are buying oil from Iran. And if they stop buying by some deal with the United States, Iran will have no income. Russia is going to strike a deal on the Ukraine, and then they will rely less on Iran as well. So it's a tectonic change that is going to take place, and with enough patience, we might see Iran cornered into a position where they have to back down on their nuclear program and their aggressor program. So at this time, everybody is maneuvering for leverage for that period of, I would say, behind the wall of the 20th of January.
To see what happens when Donald Trump re-enters the White House. Now, these are Israel's enemies that are abroad, but let's talk about Israel's actions that are much closer to home, that being in the West Bank. We're seeing the different reports coming out of an IDF strike inside the West Bank. But Ariel, some interesting news today also from the IDF talking about their cooperation with the Palestinian Authority inside the West Bank. This as the PA has been operating all week and for several days now doing these counterterrorism operations in Jenin.
Yeah, so we'll start with what happened in Tulkarm today. Israeli drone struck a car in the Tulkarm camp in the northern West Bank. 4 people were killed, 3 are in critical condition. That is according to the Palestinian Health Ministry in Ramallah. One of those who were eliminated was the head of the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades in the Tulkarm camp. But that is just one example of one place where the IDF has been operating over the past 24 hours, or really over the past 3 years, consistently, pretty much on a daily and more so nightly basis in areas like Tubas, Nur Shams, Nablus. One name that does pop out that I didn't mention is Jenin, and Israel hasn't operated there. That is the main terror hub. Why? Because the Palestinian Authority has been besieging the Jenin camp for the past 15 days, targeting terror nests that have emerged there in recent years. And this is an indication as to the cooperation. Obviously, there's ongoing security coordination between the PA and the IDF, but this is one of the more significant attempts by the Palestinian Authority to reassert their sovereignty in their territories. Now, when you alluded to the cooperation, very interesting security briefing given by the military this evening indicates that, contrary to what we may be hearing from members of the governing coalition, Israel is supporting the PA in its steps to reassert its control. And even more so, the Security Cabinet has sanctioned the IDF to work to strengthen the Palestinian Authority to combat terrorism. This coincides, the briefing also described a decrease in Jewish terror in the West Bank over the past year. But I think we need to take this as an indication that what we may be hearing from political leaders isn't necessarily what is happening on the ground. And if we're looking at a political alternative to Hamas in the Gaza Strip, if it's not the PA, then Hamas will continue to be there simply because Israel isn't propping up anyone else to assume that role. And if Hamas, in the absence of an alternative, Hamas will continue to govern Gaza. Same thing regarding the West Bank. So we're seeing that Israel is quietly but consistently, and even more so perhaps amplifying in recent period, its cooperation and support to the PA security forces, and they are acting in kind by taking out, or at least trying to be more engaged in combating terror nests in Jenin.
Relic, you wanted to chime in quickly.
Yes, zooming out again. What is going to happen in the day after in Gaza? And who can take care or who can govern Gaza? There's nobody out there except for the PA. That's item number one, and that goes against some of the ministers, the extreme right ministers' wishes for Israel to stay there and not allow the PA any leeway. But the PA is supported by the United States, and it also sees the day after, on the 20th of January, where there's no other solution. So they are actually concocting an idea of a PA with Egyptian support and Saudi support in Gaza, and that will strengthen them in the against Hamas in the territories as well in Judea and Samaria, and that might be contrary to what the extreme right would like the PA to be, very weak and unable to take care of their own. So we're going to see some friction there.
A lot of movement to possibly set
within our political system.
Certainly seems to be the case. Let's stay with Gaza now, because Israel is moving forward with laws to ban UNRWA from operating in both Gaza and the West Bank due to its terror ties with Hamas. And in contrast to past U.S. statements urging Israel to rethink this anti-UNRWA legislation, the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, is now putting the burden on the UN to make a plan for when UNRWA can no longer deliver aid. Well, for more, I am joined now by our senior U.S. correspondent, Mike Wagenheim, live in Washington, D.C. Mike, what should we be making right now of this shift that we're seeing from the U.S. messaging?
You know, it was interesting. We spoke with the deputy ambassador to the UN from Washington, Robert Wood, last week in a one-on-one, and he kind of hinted to us that essentially this was a fait accompli at this point, that the implementation of the anti-UNRWA laws that were passed by the Knesset a couple of months ago were going to go into effect. It was simply a reality that the UN was going to have to deal with in some 40 days when those laws actually take effect. It was definitely a change in tack, but it was subtle in the way he worded it. Yesterday at the UN Security Council, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, the ambassador, there was no subtlety around it. She simply said the UN and Israel have to stop going at each other's throats all the time, number one. But number two, that the UN has to start having a conversation, what she called an earnest conversation with Israel about how things are going to work in Gaza once these laws are implemented, and that the UN needs to formulate a plan for continuity of the delivery of humanitarian aid into Gaza once that indeed does happen in some 40 days. So definitely a change in tack here. We spoke just about 20 minutes ago with the spokesman for UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres during the daily UN briefing, and asked the spokesman about those comments yesterday. He said that there are discussions, in fact, between the UN and Israel on an ongoing basis about the implementation of these laws that are to take effect in some 40 days that would ban contact between Israel and UNRWA, that would prevent UNRWA from operating in Israeli-controlled territory. He said those conversations essentially have had mixed results. They've had a lot of questions for Israel. Some have been answered, some haven't. They've had trouble getting responses on some issues. I asked him point blank, listen, it seems these laws are going to go into effect. Does the UN have a plan? Is it going to take responsibility in some other way for the delivery of humanitarian aid outside the confines of UNRWA through some other UN agency or agencies? The spokesman kind of danced around that and said it will continue to remain Israel's responsibility as the quote-unquote occupying power in Gaza to ensure that humanitarian aid is delivered. He said he does not want to go into hypotheticals about what will happen or what could happen once the laws actually go into effect. So at least publicly, the UN is asking questions but not really developing a contingency plan, it would appear, for what will happen. Still maybe some wishful thinking that Israel will amend these laws, cancel these laws, or otherwise work with the UN to mitigate the impact of them come January.
Quickly, Mike, so will these U.S. statements actually put the pressure on the United Nations to have some sort of a plan in action?
You know, the United Nations often looks to the U.S. as the pressure lever on Israel. It seems that the U.S. is the only one that can apply that particular pressure to Israel. This is a sign here that the U.S. is done with this, that they're not going to apply the pressure, that is gone. So in a strong way, it's a signal to the UN that, yeah, if you haven't already started thinking about a contingency plan, don't expect Washington to bail you out at this point. You've got 40 days to figure out how to make this work, because it's certain the pressure is certainly not going to come internally from the Knesset at this point to change these laws. So the UN might be, after the statements yesterday from Linda Thomas-Greenfield, rethinking how to approach here the stretch run before those laws actually go into effect.
They might be feeling that pressure finally. Mike Wagenheim, thank you for that update. We are going out for a quick break now here on The Rundown, but stay with us for more headlines right when we return.
Started on October 7th, but for many, the horror may never end. With homes destroyed, families displaced, hostages missing, soldiers fallen, and a country traumatized. In the first year alone, more than 17,000 Israelis have been wounded, and hundreds of thousands have experienced psychological trauma and need support now. Thankfully, for 112 years, Hadassah hospitals have been on the ground healing. At our expanding Gandel Rehabilitation Center, we're providing critical physical therapy and life-changing mental health services.
Hadassah is a great place.
Today I'm really thankful.
Now, some are back home, living their lives, but many more still need our help. Help your family and friends heal at Hadassah hospitals. Give today.
You live in Israel or you are preparing for your Aliyah? Congratulations. You have a smartphone? Perfect. Download the Olim app for free and discover everything we have to offer. booking medical and administrative appointments, bills paying, debt verification, instant translation, contractor recommendation, request tracking, and much more. And if you can't manage it on your own, our team speaks your language and assists you with all your procedures in Israel, starting from 199 shekels per month, unlimited and for the whole family. Don't hesitate any longer. Download the app or contact us.
Welcome back to the Rundown on I-24 News. Now, all week we have been reporting on significant progress on a hostage release deal and ceasefire in Gaza. And U.S. and Arab mediators are still optimistic these sticking points will be hashed out. For an update, let's go live to our I-24 News correspondent Balir Sladin at Hostages Square in Tel Aviv. Balir, today, unlike days and weeks past, we've seen really little details coming out. And so what do we know about talks still moving forward?
Yes, before that, let's just give a quick update. A few minutes ago, Axios are giving more information about what's going on in Doha right now, and they're saying that Israeli officials are confirming that some progress has been made in Doha today in the past few days, but they are still stressing that there are differences and gaps that needs to be bridged. According to the Israeli officials, the goal is to reach an agreement by the end of December, so in less than 2 weeks, and this is the goal, but it's not clear whether that's possible or not. We just need to remember that there is a hope that a ceasefire deal and a hostage deal will be reached before Trump enters the White House. The Prime Minister today carried out or did negotiation in a limited team with his small team about the ongoing negotiations in Doha, and the delegation, the Israeli delegation, is still in Doha right now and in talks with the CIA Director William Burns and, of course, the special envoy to the Middle East for the U.S., Britt McGurk, with the Qataris, with the Egyptians, in order to reach a ceasefire deal. The sticking points are still the number of Israeli hostages that will be released in the first phase. Over the past 24 hours, there were some reports saying that Israel is demanding right now that even soldiers would be included in the first phase, the humanitarian phase. The soldiers, if they are wounded, Israel wants Hamas to consider them as if they were in the humanitarian phase and not the second phase of the deal. On the other hand, Hamas, it's not clear whether they actually dropped their demand to the Israeli declaration of the end, to the end of the war. Yes, now they are not demanding that Israel declares in the first phase that they will end the war, but on the other hand, they're actually saying that Israel needs to give guarantees that once the deal starts, then it should go on until the last phase, which means that in anyhow Israel needs to end the war. That's something that is a red line for the Israeli government. That's what Netanyahu has said today, that this will not happen. If that is the case, then maybe we are getting closer, but there are still lots of obstacles. That's what the New York Times also said today from Israeli officials and also officials from the different delegations in Doha. Unfortunately, we still don't know whether this current cycle of negotiations will lead us to see the hostages back. That's certainly what the families of the hostages here hope for. We've talked to some of them, and they've said that they can't trust the current situation, the current negotiations, because as long as they don't see physically their loved ones back, they can't trust that any of this will lead to actually them released after 440 days back to Israel, to their homes.
Certainly seems like progress is being made, but as you mentioned, until a deal is fully signed and delivered, that will be the fateful day. Balir Sladian live at Hostages Square. Thank you for that update on the ground. Now, as Balir mentioned, it is the family members of the 100 hostages waiting most anxiously for news of a deal. I'm joined now by the father of hostage Guy Gilboa Dalal, who was kidnapped from the Nova Music Festival. Ilan Dalal, thank you so much for being with us on the Rundown this evening.
Good evening.
I want to start with just how you're feeling, because with the news that a deal could be reaching closer, I know in months past we continue to report on news of a deal coming to fruition, perhaps, but right now it does seem like it is different. And so what are you making of all of this news?
Well, we have experience with deals that didn't come out eventually, the actual hostages release. So we are skeptic for all this negotiation right now. We know that the Israeli government is more optimistic now. Our Minister of Defense is making all kind of optimistic declarations, and I hope that there is something behind it. And now the negotiations will come to a real agreement that will release hostages.
And the reports right now are stating that it's likely going to be a phased deal, starting with the release of the sick and elderly, as well as female soldiers, followed by a comprehensive deal to release all of the hostages. But many of the hostage family members, they want an all-for-all deal because there's this urgent need to get everyone out of Gaza as soon as possible. What are your thoughts?
Well, of course, that our biggest fantasy is to get them all back together. We know that this is not realistic because the both parties need to build trust between them, and this might be in phases. We don't mind that the agreement will be in phases as long as all the phases will be agreed in front and will be making step by step in order to release everybody eventually, and of course getting the IDF out of Gaza, because without this the hostages will not come back. So this must be the end of the phases, that the last of the hostages come back to Israel and the last soldiers live in Gaza.
Ilan, it has been 440 days. Did you ever expect that it would be this long? How do you even manage to get on these interviews and continue to talk about your message right now?
We never expected that it will take this long. We thought that it will be much faster, but as the time moved, we understood that we have a big problem here. And we actually have no choice, because our children is now, as we speak, are in the dark tunnel in Gaza, and they are dependent on us that we will get them out, and we are their voice. So we have no other choice, and we cannot get ourselves down. We just need to move forward and do everything we can in order to get them back and hope for the best.
Ilan, if a deal does go through after 440 plus days, what would be the first thing that you say to your son, Guy?
I will say nothing. I just want to hug him and feel him and smell him and not say a word.
Just to be together after all of this time.
Yes.
We certainly hope that that does happen, and there is progress being made on a deal to release all 100 hostages. Ilan Dalal, thank you so much for bringing us the story of Guy Gilboa Dalal, your son, and continuing to share your message.
Thank you very much.
Now, coming back in studio, I am still joined by Relek Shafir and Ariel Osran. I know it's difficult to follow a voice like that, but when we do hear the continued news of progress on a deal, but you hear from these family members and they're still skeptical because we continue to hear reports like this happening, but this time it does feel different, Relek. Do we think that there is the chance this could happen before that fateful day, January 20th, when Trump does re-enter the White House?
I think the change is that the Prime Minister understands that the public does not support his agenda to put off everything and to disregard the plight of the families. And he responds to this. Plus, Trump doesn't want to deal with this when he comes in. So he's trying to maneuver as much as he can without losing the support of the right wing and having a little bit of a cushion since Gideon Sa'ar entered the coalition, at least with Ben Gvir. He may even resort, I'm not talking of knowledge, but understanding the political situation, he might even resolve to asking, let's say, Lapid for support if he fires Ben Gvir to carry this through. Because Ben Gvir might leave and then come back again because there's nothing out there in the wilderness for him to do. So I would expect that as we get close to the 20th of January, we'll see some political maneuvering to allow for more latitude from Netanyahu.
Ariel, quickly, is their backs truly up against a wall right now? Is this the last fateful moment for them, or can they withhold the pressure being put on them?
I think some of the main developments on the ground have changed the reality. Hamas is more isolated than they have ever been. And I agree with Reddick, the Trump effect is in play in multiple arenas with regards to Israel and not regarding Israel. I will just note that over the past week we have heard constant rhetoric regarding the current position of the talks. Today was the quietest day that I recall over this past week, and that's because the teams are working in Doha. They are talking. They were supposed to also meet in Cairo. Egyptian media saying that the Hamas delegation decided not to go to the Egyptian capital because the Egyptian mediators are going to Doha themselves. That is an interesting development. But the fact that we have heard so much talk leading up to this point over the past few days, and now complete silence as the teams are working, I think that is a positive sign. But again, you have, we heard Ilan, he's just one of 100 members of 100 families who are waiting day by day for their loved ones to come back. And we really need to work our way here cautiously with as many grains of salt as possible. But the indications do feel different than what the situation has been in recent months and weeks.
Well, as we do wait on news of a ceasefire deal in Gaza, Israel is now facing another accusation of committing acts of genocide, and this time coming from the Human Rights Watch, which is a U.S.-based organization pretty much accusing Israel of deliberately withholding water from Gazan civilians, something that Kogat has shut down, calling an egregious lie. We were talking a little bit about the humanitarian situation inside Gaza as all of this news of a ceasefire might be unfolding, but Relic, this battle that Israel continues to face, what can you make of it?
I don't know if it's true or not, but certainly it is possible that the water does not reach its final destination, which is hundreds of thousands of Palestinians. So the fact that we are funneling water into Gaza doesn't mean that the recipients get it. So there might be, it's not an alternative truth. But on our side, we're supplying the water through the pipes. But on the receiving end, there is no dispersion of that water because there's nobody there to do it. So these Human Rights Watch may be right in their assertion. UNRWA was the one who could do the job, but we're not cooperating with them. So these are problems that we knew ahead of time, that when you pull out a part of the mechanism that works, there's a break there and nobody to take care of it, and we didn't really think about the day after. So this mess might cost us in the future not just allegations, but actual legal actions.
Something that Israel continues to possibly face in the midst of everything happening inside Gaza, Relik Shafir and Ariel Osaran, there's always more we can talk about, but unfortunately that's all we have time for on this edition of The Rundown. Thank you for joining us. Now, I want to go back to the security situation being faced in the West Bank. Our I-24 News defense correspondent, Matthias Inbar, sat down with the commander of the Border Patrol's South District of Jerusalem, as well as the mayor of Ma'ale Adumim, to give us the facts on the ground and how Israeli forces are working with the PA to boost security in the area. Take a look.
I'm here with Moshe Dabus, commander of the Border Guard Battalion in the Southern District of Jerusalem envelope. He's going to explain the situation on the ground to us.
As we know, since October 7, the area is volatile. We're still at war. In the north, although there is calm, there is still attempts to infiltrate. And in the south, we are of course still at war. Of course. In the envelope, we feel the pressure. There are problems. Many illegal immigrants want to enter Jerusalem or the state of Israel to bypass us. The envelope, which is the security belt for both the capital Jerusalem and Israel, there are those who simply want to walk, and there are those who simply want to carry out attacks in Israel territory. And because of that, we're here at the fence.
Unlike in the south and the north, here everything is intertwined, with Palestinian towns and villages just a few hundred meters from the Israeli towns and villages. That's the difficulty.
Israéliennes sont vraiment à quelques centaines de mètres. Elle est là la difficulté.
It's true the distances are short from the border, but the fact is, the envelope was built 20 years ago. There's a smart system of a wall with electronic fence. There are border police teams on the fence 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Using cameras, observation posts, they prevent the entrance of anyone who should not be entering Israeli territory.
But in practical terms, does this mean that the border guards are part of this anti-terrorist war?
First of all, the border police were an integral part of fighting in the south on October 7th. Fought battles in the south at certain places. I, myself, served in the south during that period, around Yad Mordechai Junction. And the border police were an integral part of fighting. The border police are a jacket of the state. It's the border police who stand at the crossing points, carry out offensive actions in both West Bank and inside Israel, carry out arrests and smart actions.
Does it mean that those who live behind us and want to enter Jerusalem will have to meet you on the way?
Every terrorist who wants to enter Jerusalem or the state of Israel and passes through the envelope will see the border police, either at the crossing point or on the fence, or patrolling. We're always there.
When you see what is happening in Jenin or Tulkarim, does it set off alarm bells in your area?
We're always at a high state of operational readiness, especially since October 7th. We have forces in the communities in the envelope. We have many forces on the border of the envelope. We're strong at the crossing points. I don't see anyone bypassing us because of the strong presence of the border police around Jerusalem.
I'm going to be hard on you, but we said the same thing about Gaza, and yet the terrorists got through.
Because of what happened in Gaza, I'm certain that here in the envelope we learn lessons. We conduct exercises, carry out smart actions, or actions I cannot disclose in the media. So what happened in Gaza would not happen in Jerusalem.
You are the commander of part of the Jerusalem envelope, which is a huge area.
Ça fait quand même énormément de secteurs à surveiller et vous y arrivez quand même.
True. It's a lot, but the border police in the envelope has 3 strong operation battalions working with the military police. There are civilian security guards who help out at the crossing. We and the IDF cooperate fully with the brigades in the West Bank and of course with the regular police inside Jerusalem. All this combined is a strong human element that helps us function as a strong independent force ready for any scenario.
What happened at the beginning of the week with an alert about an attack or potential infiltration of terrorists into Jerusalem? Is that why people say that the lesson of the 7th of October have been learned?
After October 7th, we have no doubts. There are no gray areas. That means we get an identification, a warning. The border police and the envelope know how to deploy the critical points to foil the threat.
And how do you go about it in practical terms? Do you close off the city with a padlock?
We simply use the communications device we know to be on the fence, in the strength, the forces, and our bases, and we know how to do a good job around Jerusalem.
I'm here with the mayor of Ma'ale Adumim, Guy Ifra. Are you worried when you see that things are starting to heat up in the north of Samaria?
Of course, we understand today that after the very important moves Israel made in the south and in the north, the West Bank is liable to the next arena, and I'm very happy that at Central Command and in the IDF and the government as a whole, they understand the need to safeguard the settlers in the West Bank, and I hope that we will get the required focus, because what happened in the northern West Bank can happen elsewhere in the West Bank, and we have to be ready. We as local council and the military.
You are also the mayor of a town that is home to one of the biggest industrial zones, with thousands of Palestinian workers.
That's right. On a regular day, we let 6,000 Palestinians enter the industrial zone of Ma'ale Adumim. It's very, very significant. On the other hand, we respect the workers, bring them an organised place to check that only those who have permits have entered, and that they have no weapons. And I won't lie, Salim Fayyad, who tried then to organise a boycott on Israel through the workers, he told them, don't work for the Jews. It didn't work. In the end, they came because they wanted to earn a salary. I prefer to believe that the majority of people want to do things the way they should be done. But we need to be careful and pay attention. On the one hand, to allow them to work, and on the other hand, make sure none of them want to carry out an attack.
Are you constantly in contact with the Israeli security forces?
Since October the 7th, and of course since I took up my post, I'm in constant communication, daily, with the police that is responsible for the security in Ma'ale Adumim, which is different from the situation in the West Bank, where security responsibility rests with the IDF. In the case of Ma'ale Adumim and the other villages around Jerusalem, it's the police who are responsible for the security. So I'm in touch with the police station commander, the district police commander, and of course with the IDF and the municipality security branch to ensure Ma'ale Adumim remains protected. We take care to hold situational assessments to safeguard our residents.
You're also a reservist commander of an infantry unit with over 200 days in reserve.
Right. Since October the 7th, I called up my battalion. I'm a battalion commander in the reserves, but since I took up my post, I couldn't continue commanding, since the battalion was called up for a long time and I'm needed here, so I had to leave the battalion. But with all due modesty, I think I understand a bit about the subject. So, I invest a lot in security, pressuring the government. Whatever we can invest with the forces of the municipality, we invest. So that on the one hand, there'll be regular life here, and on the other hand, there'll be security for the city and its residents.
Last question. Ma'ale Adumim is surrounded by towns like Azaria, Abu Dis, Isawiya. If the ground were to explode all around, what would such a situation look like in Ma'ale Adumim?
Today, the most qualitative threat that we're talking about is a difficult one. It's a campaign of death, not a lone attacker. We are wary of it, and so we are ready for it. Both the security department and the border police forces, there is a new company, a reserve company of 100 fighters, whose weapons and equipment will be at home in case they have to rush into action. There are a lot of forces, both the police and the military, who will respond as needed. But I very much hope they won't need to, that things will calm down and will return to a level of calm and security as needed.
Now to a little bit of later news. For over $5 million, the Sotheby's auction house sold the oldest stone version of the Ten Commandments found to date. Our Fabio Shapiro has the story.
Thank you so much, Richard.
What is the value of your historical and religious heritage?
Bidders at $4,200,000. The Ten Commandments, Richard, it's yours. Sold for $4 million too.
Auction house Sotheby's in New York just sold the oldest known tablet inscribed with the Ten Commandments for over $5 million after fees.
Before you is a stone dating back over 1,500 years. It dates to the late Roman Byzantine period. It is inscribed in Paleo-Hebrew script in 20 lines, the verses of the Ten Commandments.
Centuries later, the tablet was discovered during a railroad construction work near the now Israeli town of Yavne in 1913.
The person who dug it up didn't realize its significance and brought it home and used it as a paving stone. It stayed in this person's home for about 30 years until an archaeologist living in Israel, Dr. Jacob Kaplan, recognized its importance and purchased it from this individual.
The tablet was then sold to Jewish dealers and collectors until it found its way to the auction. And while this may be the oldest version of the Ten Commandments carved in stone ever found, it is not exactly the one that Jews follow today. Instead of the commandment, "Thou shalt not take the Lord's name in vain," it includes an instruction to pray to Mount Gerizim, the holy site of the Samaritans, a group that broke off from the ancient Israelites thousands of years ago. And though the original tablet carried by Moses was never found, it shares a similarity with the auction one.
This stone weighs 115 pounds. It measures about 20 by 22 inches. And in fact, this is exactly the same measurements that the rabbis in the early first centuries agreed was the measurements of the original Ten Commandments that Moses carried down from the Mount.
The oldest piece of the shared moral code to Judaism and other Abrahamic religions was bought by an anonymous buyer who plans to donate it to an Israeli institution.
Always interesting artifacts to be found right here in the Holy Land. And on that light story, we're going to end this edition of The Rundown. You can always head to i24news.tv on more of these developing stories. Day 440 of Israel at war. For now, I'm Nicole Zedek. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
Shalom. ¿Qué me trae por aquí? La necesidad impostergable de 600 millones de hispanoparlantes que ahora necesitan escuchar el mensaje judío e israelí en tiempos difíciles. ¿Cómo lograrlo? Cuento con ustedes para continuar llevando a lo más alto del mundo mediático una inquebrantable diplomacia pública al servicio de la verdad sin concesión alguna.
Hello and welcome to Jewish World Weekly on I-24 News. I'm Emily Francis. Join us every week where we focus on stories, issues, and personalities of Jewish interest here in Israel and throughout the diaspora, the global Jewish community. And we start with our top 5 items in the Jewish world, presented by Nicole Zedek. Hi, Nicole.
Thanks, Emily. Here are the top 5 items in the Jewish world this week. Trials are underway for some of the suspects in the anti-Semitic attack last month on Maccabi Tel Aviv fans in Amsterdam. New details are emerging about how the attacks took place. Prosecutors released WhatsApp messages of attackers saying they were looking for a, quote, Jew hunt in the Dutch capital, suggesting this was a premeditated attack and not a response to anti-Arab chanting from Israeli fans. Sweden's government is launching a project to chart the different types of racism in society and assess the level of Swedes' intolerance towards minorities. Sweden's equalities minister said there has been an increase in attacks against Swedish Jews, particularly in schools, where several times swastikas have been drawn on students' lockers. A German court has ruled that an 84-year-old woman and her son must vacate their home and return it to the descendants of a Jewish family forced out in 1939. The house in Wandlitz, about 15 miles north of Berlin, was initially bought by Alice Donat and Helena Lindenbaum in 1932, before the Nazis forced them to sell it for a small price to the ancestors of the current residents. Well, the court made its initial ruling in 2015, but after a decade-long legal battle, the court ruled in favor of Donat and Lindenbaum's descendants. The founder of global fashion chain Mango, Isaac Andique, has died at the age of 71 after an accident while hiking in Spain. According to Spanish media, he fell into a ravine while on a hiking trail in Montserrat. Born in Turkey to a Jewish family, Andique emigrated to Spain in 1969, where he co-founded Mango in Barcelona with his brother, Naman Andique. And the New York Yankees have agreed to a whopping 7-year deal with Jewish pitcher Max Fried, worth a reported $218 million. Fried spent 7 years with the Atlanta Braves and became a 2-time All-Star in 2022 and 2024, and is now the 4th highest paid pitcher in Major League Baseball. Now, those are all of the top 5 items in the Jewish world this week. Back to you, Emily.
With more than a year of sheer terror for Jewish students and professors on university campuses in the wake of the October 7th massacre, some universities are beginning to take action. The University of Michigan administrator Rachel Dawson was fired over alleged anti-Semitic comments. She's an administrator with the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Office and is accused of saying, quote, "We don't work with Jews. They're wealthy and privileged and take care of themselves," and that Jewish people have no genetic DNA that would connect them to the land of Israel. Dawson says she plans to take legal action claiming the university violated her constitutional rights as a public employee. Joining us now with more is I-24 News senior U.S. correspondent Mike Wagenheim, who is in Washington. Mike, tell us what more you could tell us about this incident and also an incident involving very extreme vandalism for one of the regents of the university.
Yeah, very trying times up there in Ann Arbor right now. So Rachel Dawson, the head, or was the head of the Michigan Office of Academic Multicultural Initiatives within the larger Office of DEI, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. Now, Dawson attended an academic conference in Philadelphia some time ago, and she was approached by two Jewish professors there who found out she was attending and wanted to ask her questions about the anti-Semitism that was going on, very prevalent, well documented on the University of Michigan's campus, and that's when she allegedly made those comments. Now, Dawson's lawyer is saying that she didn't, in fact, make those comments, and the one about Jewish people having no connection to the land of Israel was instead a comment about, well, there are many ethnic groups or multiple ethnic groups that have a connection to that particular land, but she's denying the other comments were made. A complaint was filed by one of those Jewish professors with the Anti-Defamation League in Michigan, which determined that, all things considered, the weight of the evidence said that she did, in fact, make those comments, and apparently that's what the University of Michigan felt as well. So they fired her. It's part of a larger issue surrounding DEI, not just at Michigan, but on campuses across the nation. The University of Michigan Regents, the board that oversees the university, has been talking about maybe defunding DEI. It's become, kind of a progressive bastion, politically motivated in some ways, and certainly has done so to the exclusion of Jews. Many DEI administrators say, we have the oppressed and we have the oppressors. The Jews are on that side being the oppressors. And there you have it, which has led to so many problems on campuses nationwide, which takes us to the regents themselves. The regents are elected officials in Michigan who oversee state universities, and one of them, Jordan Acker, a regent at the University of Michigan, is Jewish, and he has had his property vandalized now 3 times in what police are saying may amount to hate crimes. The most recent incident took place last week at his home. He had his windows broken and his car spray painted with divest, of course, an allusion to divesting from Israel, and the words Free Palestine, along with the upside down red triangle that has come to be known as a symbol of Hamas targets. Now, it's again the 3rd time now that Acker's property has been vandalized during the course of the Israel-Hamas war. Acker wants more action to be taken by the University of Michigan, which, at least to their credit on this incident, did staunchly denounce what they perceive to be an anti-Semitic attack against Jordan Acker. Again, just major problems right now, not just at Michigan, but again, across the country. We hoped it would kind of cease or at least die down during the summer break. That hasn't happened to any extent, Emily.
Okay, also, and part of what they threw into the house was a bottle of urine, if we want to also, mention that. Just a horrific behavior. President-elect Trump has been quite vocal. He was at an Israel-American Council event a few months ago pledging to take measures to combat anti-Semitism on campuses, saying it's very important for U.S. Jews to have equal protection under the law, and they're going to get it. So what do we expect him to do about it should things flare up once he takes office?
Well, it's interesting, and they've already obviously, flared up, Emily. It's to what extent they're going to take action now. And it's interesting with the Trump administration because the nominees have said constantly, we're going to take action. There's no doubt about it. But also the Trump administration and their nominees and allies have said, we got to dismantle the Department of Education. The Department of Education runs those investigations of anti-Semitism on campus. We spoke to Kenneth Marcus. He's the head of the Brandeis Center and created the structure when he worked at the Department of Education to investigate incidents of anti-Semitism and other hate crimes. And we asked him, well, what happens here if the Department of Education is in fact defunded or dismantled by the Trump administration to some extent? Where can college students go to voice their complaints about anti-Semitism? Here was his answer in a recent discussion we had with Kenneth Marcus.
It's 20 years ago that under the George W. Bush administration, I developed the doctrinal structures under which Jewish student civil rights are protected by the Education and Justice Department. And that has withstood the test of time now for 20 years over different administrations in different parties. It's not going anywhere. Assuming that President Trump is able, with the support of Congress, to dismantle the Department of Education, that doesn't mean that this work will cease, although it does mean that it will be taken under a different address. There may be, fewer administrative cases of a lesser degree of significance that are pursued, but that those that are pursued are done with much greater vigor. Department of Justice cases and investigations have a power to bring in far more resources and greater accountability. So we don't yet know what a closure of the department would look like, and we don't expect it's going to happen overnight, but there's no reason to assume that it will lead to weaker as opposed to stronger enforcement in the cases that we care about.
I-24 News senior U.S. correspondent Mike Wagenheim, thank you very much. Changing gears, a new Netflix film about Mary, Mother of Jesus, is causing controversy over the casting of 21-year-old Israeli actress Noah Cohen as Mary and Israeli actor Ido Taco as Joseph. We know from biblical accounts that Mary, Joseph, and Jesus were Israelites, but now critics are calling for a boycott of the film, claiming Mary was a Palestinian. Take a look at part of the trailer.
Mary, your birth was a gift for your mother and I. It was a miracle. But in exchange, I made a promise.
We have been waiting.
Great heresy. The prophecy speaks of the coming Messiah.
Joining us now by Zoom is Chen Mazig, a senior fellow at the Tel Aviv Institute. He is now in Washington attending a Hanukkah lighting candle event at the White House. Welcome, and thank you for being here, Chen.
Thanks for having me, Emily.
So you are definitely a real activist that has been taken to social media to really correct wrongs in terms of narratives and history, with critics now calling for a boycott of this film, insisting she was a Palestinian. Explain why that can't be the case.
You know, I keep being surprised that I have to fight for Jesus' identity. I never imagined myself being in this position. And I'm sure many Jews share this feeling of, why do we have to fight for Jesus' identity? Jesus was a Jew. You know, in Luke 2:21, Jesus was circumcised according to the Jewish law. In Luke 4:16, we saw that Jesus regularly attended synagogues and participated in Shabbat prayers. In John, he goes to Jerusalem to celebrate Passover. They called him the King of the Jew. In John, in the inscription on the cross, read, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. Jesus was a Jew, and the reason that we are seeing this campaign to try and rewrite history in this specific way is because that if those anti-Israel groups and movement would admit that Jesus was a Jew, it means that Jews lived in the land of Israel long before the first Christmas. So I think that's why we're seeing this campaign that is going on in Columbia University and in Harvard and in other places, in Oxford, this attempt to say that Jews have nothing to do with the land of Israel, because that's the only way to justify this anti-Israel campaign that is calling for the removal of all Jews from our ancestral homeland.
Well, and, you know, not only that, I think it's safe to say, you know, the Jewish people have been technically kind of whitewashed out of history with, with the portrayals, obviously, over years, and now a portrayal claiming the Palestinian identity. Explain why historically it's not a factor. There was no such thing back then.
Right. I mean, Jesus wasn't a Palestinian because Palestine was named that after the Romans conquered Israel and the Emperor Hadrian renamed this land to punish the Jews and to completely remove any sovereignty from our homeland. So rewriting Jesus' identity is just rewriting Jewish history. That's why so many of them are doing it, and that's why a lot of us are upset, because we recognize that it's not about fighting for anyone's rights, but it's only to erase Jewish connection to this land. I don't understand why you can't support Palestinian rights and needs without reframing ancient Jewish history of this land. But it's something that we're seeing happening over and over again. So I don't think it's a minor or just a radical campaign. It's something that is very sophisticated and aimed at people that don't know any better, and make sure that their whole worldview, this anti-Israel worldview, would stay intact while they're doing this.
Obviously, screen legend Sir Anthony Hopkins didn't have an issue. He plays King Herod, and he has a history. Apparently, he grew up with Jewish families, was involved in their Shabbat home things, turning on lights and whatnot.
Yeah, it's quite interesting time that we're living in when people are so uncomfortable with admitting historical facts, and I mean, it's fascinating that people from different generations didn't have to face these issues, and we could speak about history. We can say that Israel is doing things that are wrong and criticize Israel, but these days, I think it's very hard for people to have a conversation about historical facts and about the Jewish connection to this land of Israel. In the earlier report that you interviewed, that the reporter was saying that Adi and I, a facilitator in Colombia, was fired because she said that she doesn't think Jews have any DNA connection to the land of Israel. Truth and fact really don't care about what a facilitator in Colombia feels about Jews. The reality and history will always be the strongest case we have for why Jews have the right to live in Israel and why being anti-Israel is really anti-Semitic.
Thank you very much, as always, Chen Mazig, Senior Fellow at the Tel Aviv Institute. Always a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
As the Russia-Ukraine war wages on, millions of Ukrainians remain displaced in foreign countries. One of those countries taking in these refugees is Hungary, which is on the western border of Ukraine. And deep inside western Hungary is a refugee camp designed to house the thousands of Jews who had to flee their homeland. I-24 News correspondent Joe Brown visited this compound by Lake Balaton and witnessed a very special day for a very special couple.
The quiet, serene Hungarian countryside, thousands of miles away from a war that changed the lives of millions.
Начались военные действия.
Military actions began. We were very anxious about it.
Как происходило? Мы были...
We were at home.
Мы были дома. Жили...
We stayed at home for about a month and then decided to leave.
И потом решили уехать.
On February 24th, 2022, Russian tanks entered eastern Ukraine for what Moscow called a, quote, special military operation. With fears that the entire country could be taken over, millions of Ukrainians tried to flee their homeland. This includes thousands of Ukrainian Jews. Whilst many sought refuge in Israel, thousands fled into neighboring countries, such as Hungary.
I happen to know the chief rabbi of Ukraine, Rabbi Stamler, who is the head of the Jewish Federation of Ukraine. And on the day when the war broke out, on that morning, I called him up and I said, we heard the terrible news, and if there's anything we can do, if we can give you a hand, if we can help you, we would like to help.
Rabbi Kovesh heard from his Ukrainian counterpart that hundreds of Jews in Dnipro, central Ukraine, were sleeping on the floors of synagogues, and asked if Kovesh's Association of Hungarian Jewish Communities, an offshoot of Chabad known as EMI, could do anything to help.
I called up my friends in the Hungarian government and Minister Gulyás, who is the minister of the Prime Minister's office. He right away called me back and he said, yeah, we have a place.
That place is a small government-owned property in Balatonőrsöd in western Hungary, largely abandoned since an infamous speech by former Prime Minister Ferenc Gyurcsány from the site. Situated on Lake Balaton, this compound can host hundreds of Ukrainian Jews who left the country at the outbreak of the war. Around 4,000 people, including some Israelis who fled the North and Gaza border at the start of the war last year, have stayed in the camp since it was founded in spring 2022.
We have now around 150 people that live here day to day. Many of them are half families, just women with children, or either their husbands are still in Ukraine or they work in the city in Budapest. So the Ukrainian Jews became a part and parcel of the Hungarian Jewish community, and we are very happy for that.
One of those 150 people living here is Andrei, who fled Berdyansk in southeast Ukraine shortly after the start of the war. Andrei was not born Jewish, but his wife Daniela is. She fled Hungary with their son David shortly after the war started, with Andrei following soon after. After Chabad integrated Andrei into the Hungarian community, he opted for a decision that would change his life.
When I got here to Balaton, there was a Jewish community. I immediately became part of it, and this gave me an even stronger push to undergo the process of conversion to Judaism. I started learning how everything works, attending prayers, participating with others in the prayers. I observed how people lived, how the Jewish people live, their traditions, their inner values, their feelings, and their actions. I really love our Jewish people because we are very kind.
Today is an important day for Andrei. Just a couple of weeks after his conversion was completed, he is now marrying Daniela in an Orthodox Jewish wedding in the presence of their family, including their newborn child Aviram, and their fellow Ukrainians living in Balaton. And despite the hardships of having to move to a new country in difficult conditions, Andrei is overwhelmed with the support and love he has received from the Jewish community and looks forward to his new lease of life as a Jewish man.
I am very happy, and I hope that everyone around me is happy right now. This is more than happiness. I can't put it into words. It's amazing, simply extraordinary. I'm grateful to everyone who took part in this. Thank you all so much. I am immensely happy.
Few countries have a more complicated relationship with Jewish history than Spain, but now, more than 5 centuries after the expulsion of the Jews in 1492, a new museum is being built in Madrid that will highlight the immense contributions of Spanish Jewry from the Golden Age to the present, presented in a spirit of coexistence and harmony. I went to Madrid to film a TV special of Holy Land Uncovered, and here is a preview of the impressive Museo Hispano-Judía taking shape in a huge way.
Bienvenida.
David!
How are you?
Finally, we meet in person.
Thank you. It's a real
Wow.
pleasure.
So this is the future of bringing back to life.
Hopefully, of establishing a new way of working between Christians and Jews in the Hispanic Jewish world. This is called the Museo Hispano-Judío. And it's in Spanish because Spanish language is really the element that gives a flow to this relationship for thousands of years.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Well, let's take a tour.
Let's do it. The building is owned by the Metro Company of Madrid. This used to be a building dedicated to monitoring all the substations, the electric substations of the Subway Company of Madrid. So besides the building, you have a system of tunnels that connect this building to all the metro infrastructure of the city. Wow. So this is a hall that we're going to dedicate as part of the permanent exhibition. It's going to be divided into 2 floors to show the history of Judaism and specifically also Hispanic Jewish ties and culture and why is it a special relationship. And we're going to show it from a perspective of showing the things that unite us. You know, there's obviously light and darkness in every story. We will talk about everything, but we will show that, you know, we have an opportunity in this moment in time to build something together. The ceiling is going to be increased, so you see already the structure there, plus another floor. So that's going to be a grand entrance. All of these, by the way, the columns go out. And if
So
you come this way, this is the entrance, and I'm going to show you how you're going to really enter. So you're entering from the very first moment, and you're doing a journey like that is sort of biblical, nice and warm. This structure is the home of the priest of the church that you see over there, the white one, which is the largest church of the area. The closeness between the Jewish and the Christian worlds is obvious. And what we're trying to do here is to look at things in a positive way, because Christianity has nothing to do with what it was 1,000 years ago. So all of this will be empty, no columns, and it's going to be a 400-seat auditorium with a connection to this that you will see right now that leads us into the other area. So you can see that it's open already.
Wow, this is really freaky.
By the way, this is where it's connected to the tunnels, literally. So it's pretty scary looking. But think about the following. This can be a room where you walk in and you have all of this, you know, with the different films that are happening. And it shows you, for example, the history of the Jews in Monterrey. Monterrey in Mexico, which is an incredible place. It was a city that was created by Jews. We're entering the area where we are going to have still part of our permanent collection, but mainly now we're entering into the temporary collections. So you can have, for example, we can bring 100 pieces of Chagall's paintings.
Wow.
And we can bring it here, and we have the whole collection that can run independently. We have 4 galleries. First gallery is dedicated to Judaism from Avraham Avinu to the Shoah. Second part is about Hispanic Jewish world with all its history. How Jews arrived here, how Jews lived here, when Jews left this place, how conversos had to leave for 5 centuries, and what happened to this Sephardic diaspora. The third gallery that we have is a gallery about Jewish values. So we're going to show in this gallery what things in common we have between the main monotheistic faiths. There's a fourth gallery that is very important to us, which tells you about Judaism today, modern Judaism. And there, what we show is the centrality of Israel. We get 85 million tourists in Spain every year. The statistics will probably hit 90 million. So that's, you know, those are very big numbers. Everything is expanding also. The airport of Madrid is expanding. The city of Madrid has had also tourism growing on a 20-25% basis for the last 4 years. And we also believe that this is the moment where you need to talk about a few specific messages, where you celebrate diversity, but from your identity. It's not just, you know, a soup where nobody is anything anymore. On the contrary, we are very strong about our identity, but we're very open in terms of sharing and including and so forth. But from the perspective of